Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Hope that you had a fabulous weekend. We are here for the Astro-Babble, about to go over 5 charts that have been donated by you, my lovely followers, across social media platforms. And yeah, we're going to be talking about these 5 charts. I haven't seen them before. We're going to run them nice and fresh, get some fun perspectives astrologically, talk about some of the formations, talk about how I read charts, but also kind of the importance of specific planets and what they mean in signs and houses, and how that equates to life events and major transits and things like that. So we're just going to have a little bit of fun, just a little bit of fun this morning. I will be doing an all call later this week for more charts because I only have a couple days worth left. But if you would like to be on the live stream in the meantime, feel free to private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time. I will add you to the queue, and we will feature your chart on the live stream. Likewise, if you would like to learn astrology, or if you would like to work one-on-one with me privately, you can always submit a consultation request and download some of the astrology classes that I have via my website, which is scorpiorisingastrology.com. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll pull up the first chart. For those of you watching on Instagram, unfortunately, I cannot show you the chart, so you're going to have to look at the YouTube recording on the YouTube channel if you would like to see the actual charts that we're working with. So let's talk about Sam. Great name. Cheers. So Sam has a Taurus rising. Where is Venus? Venus is in her domicile in Libra. Ooh, Sam, great chart. I love it. So having a Taurus ascendant really does give you this kind of grounded nature. It is the fixed Earth sign. It's a little bit heavier of an energy than some people like to deal with, but you also have a lovely Capricorn moon, which we'll work with in the 9th house in a few moments. But it's just this idea that you have this nice earthy grounded foundation, and what better to anchor that earthy foundation than the goddess of love herself in her sign of Libra. She is in the 6th house. Which is the house of work, health, and pets. Not necessarily her favorite spot to be, but she's in her right sign, which is glorious. Having a planet in their right sign ruling the chart is just a very beneficial aspect. It means that that particular planet has graced you with multiple blessings. And so Venus is an archetype that if you're ever in need, if you're ever in want of anything, I would highly, highly recommend that you look to Venus, because her grace is very present within your chart. But on the flip side of that, we do have Venus in Libra, the sign of balance and justice, in the 6th house of work. So it would not surprise me at all if you entered the legal or counseling professions in order to help people seek justice or social work for kind of wrongs that need to be righted. Venus in Libra is very different from Venus in Taurus. Venus in Taurus is the Earth Mother archetype. You know, she's abundantly caring. She is still. She is fixed. She lets you come to her as opposed to her coming to you. But when we see Venus in Libra, this is a little bit more of that active cardinal energy that we see in the air sign, which is kind of active or young by nature. So we have Venus kind of donning this suit of armor, carrying her sword as literally kind of the lady of justice. And that I think is a beautiful archetype for you to have in your chart. Let's see, what else? What else do we want to talk about? So let's go to that moon, shall we? So that moon in Capricorn in the 9th, co-present with its ruler, Saturn in Capricorn, as well as Neptune in Capricorn, up in the 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education, spirituality. It's a great place for the moon to be. I really like the moon being in the 9th house. But the moon is in her fall in Capricorn. She's opposing her natal sign of Cancer. She doesn't necessarily enjoy being in Capricorn, but having Saturn there ruling the houses is nice. It's a nice kind of pick-me-up. It does tell me that, especially when it comes to 9th house topics like travel, foreigners, higher education, and spirituality, that you really do take a very business-oriented mind to it, that it is something that you you're able to really work through slowly over time. And also, your moon is here, which means that ninth house topics are going to be very emotionally satisfying for you. Wherever we see the moon in a chart, it's those house topics that really hit us in the feels emotionally. But we can also use those topics to kind of hack into our emotional health. So I would really encourage, like, if you're feeling soured by life's experience, it would be really important for you to go learn something, go interact with a foreign culture, go study something, go travel somewhere else. Also, increase your spiritual practice to enhance your emotional connection. All those things would be very valuable and valid. Let's see. So we have this really nice Scorpio pile up in the seventh house of relationships. So we have Mercury in Scorpio, Pluto in Scorpio, and Sun in Scorpio, all in the seventh house of relationships. That Mercury is making a really nice trine to the North Node in Pisces in the 11th. And co-present with the secondary ruler, Pluto in Scorpio, which is glorious. And then the Sun's here. Pluto is combust or is not combust? Is not combust, because that's 9 degrees away, so that's excellent. When we look at putting the Sun in Scorpio in the 7th, where's Mars? Mars is also in Aries in the 12th. Oh, that's tricky. That's tricky. So here's where we get into kind of the darker aspects of your chart. This is where we get into kind of the heavier, more watery aspects of your chart, which are harder to work through. Because we have Mars, the planet of the warrior, in his home sign of Aries, which is great, but he's in the 12th house of hidden enemies. And from the 12th house of hidden enemies, he's also ruling your 7th house of relationships. So you tend to be attracted to the fixer-uppers, just as a general kind of side note, and you tend to be attracted to people who have that dark side. Especially with Mercury, the planet of the mind, in Scorpio, your mind understands that mind, because you too also have that kind of underworld vibe going through your head at any given moment, very much that psychopompic role of you being not only hypersensitive psychically, but also understanding what it means to have true trauma. Yeah, but that Mars in Aries, I think, pairs nicely with your Venus in Libra. Although they are technically opposing each other, they're both in their own domiciles, lighting up the 6th house of health and the 12th house of hospitalizations. Like the caregiver vibe, the more I look at your chart, the more I see it really, really coming through. But where that caregiver vibe is actually going to come through the most is not just in a health and wellness oriented field, but also in your relationships, because that Mars is ruling the 7th house. And your Sun is here too. So you identify very strongly with the idea that relationships are a very important part of your life. It's an ego identification for you, so it's not always the healthiest, but it is something that you need in order to thrive and feel like you are at your kind of solar best, that confidence, that self-esteem, which is tricky in and of itself to put your relationships on such a pedestal. But I think where that pedestal comes in handy is your ability to use those relationships to navigate their trials and also fulfill your life's purpose. Because the North Node in Pisces in the 11th house of friendships really does mean that you're here to connect to the community. You're here to really build a tribe that's based off of sensitivity, that's based off of mutual interaction, that's based off of learning from each other and growing together as kind of this coalesced unit of tribal awareness, this kind of group consciousness. Yeah. And the way that you really start to understand the group consciousness is by taking somebody very close into your bubble, somebody who's probably somewhat broken, a little bit shattered, and then picking them apart and really seeing what they're made of, and not necessarily in a harsh way, but really understanding that that relationship is a segue. It's an opportunity for you to unpack trauma that you might not necessarily have firsthand experience with, that will then help you to understand the trials of others and fulfill your life's purpose down the road. That Mercury in Scorpio is ruling the 2nd house, but Jupiter is retrograde in the 2nd house in Gemini, which isn't necessarily an ideal placement for him, especially with Jupiter ruling the 11th house of friendships and the 8th house of business and taxes from that 2nd house of finance. That's tricky. I would really, really want to make sure that you have a good accountant, a good CPA to manage those finances. I would not let your spouse touch your finances, um, because although they mean well, there's too much muddiness, there's too much closeness there. I don't like the retrograde. I don't like the Mercury and Scorpio being involved. Although finances in your relationships will always be connected because of that rulership, I think it's important to acknowledge that connection, but also separate that connection so that your personal life and your financial life get a chance to thrive separately while being connected. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. And also, if you really wanted to attract a really nice partner, your sun in Scorpio ruling your fourth house of family does tell me that the family unit should actually be one of the deciding factors when choosing a spouse or a partner, because they will actually have a more objective experience and they'll be able to know your type and who is also best for you. So whether that's bio family or a chosen family doesn't matter, but your family unit, like, screen them through your inner circle. Okay, cool. Good morning, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody jumping on Instagram and Facebook. Let's go to our second chart of the morning, who is Sam number 2. So Sam was nice enough to donate the little baby's chart, little bambino, so cute. So we have the second chart of our morning donated by Sam. This is the little one. I love reading for children so much. I especially love reading for children because the parents will get a chance to see not just who they are, but what they need. And this is just such a beautiful example of it. Like, looking at this chart, like, Jesus Christ, there's so much that we need to go over in this chart. It's absolutely ridiculous. So first and foremost, ascendant is in Cancer. Ascendant is in Cancer, which gives a watery feel. Water will be a theme of this chart. Just looking at some of the placements here, absolutely, absolutely ridiculous when it comes to the watery nature of this chart. But we also have the North Node in the first house. The North Node in the first house really does tell us that this person is here to develop their own sense of self, their own personality. They're here to tackle their physical mysteries, their body mysteries, their sense of self-esteem. Yeah. We also need to be aware that the stomach will be physically something that will always be slightly hypersensitive and prone to issue, but diet, if regulated properly, will be a wonderful remediation tool for this chart. Before we get to the grand trine that's in this chart, we also need to respect that the ruler of this chart is an exalted moon. Having the ruler of your chart being exalted is just a really blessed thing, which is actually something that we saw in Sam's chart. And now she's passed on some of that grace to her child. But the type of grace is very different. So we have a very lunar grace. We have a very emotional grace. We have a very intuitive grace, as opposed to the Venus and Libra ruling the chart that we saw last time, which is a little bit more about justice and really understanding divine sense of balance. Here we have a moon in Taurus, which is all about sensual pleasure. It's all about understanding that there is a give and a take to appreciation. There is multiple ways to find emotional fulfillment, but where this moon is placed is going to be in the 11th house of tribes, communities, social groups, and philanthropic efforts. So we have a really strong community link to this moon here. And this is going to be somebody who's naturally going to be the mom friend. Yeah, who's naturally going to have a heart that's way, way too big for their own good, but also who is genuinely involved with caring for the community wherever they are present. So really focusing on those kind of tribal community gatherings, like wherever they live, there should be a community garden, like they should be very active socially, like it's just something that they need in order to survive, is that social contact. But now we have to go to the water trine in the chart. So we actually have a very strong grand water trine in this chart. Although it's not exact by degree, the ascendant, which is the fastest moving marker in the chart, is applying to a trine with Venus and Scorpio, who is also applying to a trine with Neptune in Pisces. So that's a pretty strong watery aspect in this chart between the first house of self, the fifth house of children, sexuality, creativity, and parenting, as well as Neptune and Pisces in the ninth house of travel, foreigners, higher education, and spirituality. This is a very deep, very intimate, very watery formation that we see in this chart. Not just are the physical mysteries going to be very important, especially with the stomach and the digestion and health in general, but we also move to the fifth house where we have a Venus in her fall. Venus does not like to be in Scorpio. She actually very much hates it. It's the exiled princess kind of archetype that we see with Venus in Scorpio in the fifth house, which is not really a great position to uncover the mysteries of the fifth house, because the mysteries of the fifth house are very much about reproduction, about sexuality, about creativity, and Venus, who is the goddess of a lot of those things, is in detriment. She's not here doing what she loves. In fact, she's kind of in the sewers, like sloshing around in the muck, trying to make sure that she doesn't get captured or experience treason in her own kingdom. Like it's a very sacrificed Venus, and I don't necessarily enjoy that placement in this chart, because it means that those mysteries of the fifth house are going to be rather troublesome in the chart. So we just need to be aware of that. We need to nurture appropriate sexual contact. We need to nurture that, especially because that mom friend archetype is so strong with the moon in Taurus. We need to also be aware that love cannot be one-sided. One has to flow both ways, or love has to flow both ways. Appropriate sexual contact, very important. Then also the idea of being the parent to others, and that being a role that can be leveraged in the wrong way. Yeah. And then also creativity, like feeling that it's okay to express themselves, going to be very, very important to nurture and foster in this chart. Also, some Venus remediation would be very important, which I think is great because Sam has a very strong Venus ruling her chart, and her child has a detrimented Venus. So this is a perfect example of astrological parenting gone right, where we have this beautiful Venus who's coming in from the mother, and then we have a detrimented Venus who's present in the sun, and the mother coaches the son to embody that Venus through her example. Like that's mwah, chef kiss, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So I like that. I like that in the chart. But then we also have Neptune and Pisces here, who's making this grand trine with the ascendant and Venus. And Neptune and Pisces is very firmly present in the ninth house of travel, foreigners, higher education, and spirituality. We also have Mars and Pisces here, which isn't great, but it's not terrible. So Neptune and Pisces taking part in this grand water trine is also going to bring in the escapist tendencies, is also going to bring in some of those, like, if I just fly to the other end of the world kind of tendencies. Neptune and Pisces, when expressed appropriately, is very spiritual. In fact, in this chart, we might find that this person escapes into spirituality in order to avoid their detrimented Venus. So the idea of going into like church clergy in order to stay celibate and not explore the Venusian mysteries would be one not necessarily healthy way to process this Neptune, Cancer ascendant, and Venus Scorpio trine that's in the chart. So I think we need to respect that and honor that it's going to be much easier to flee. Yeah. In this chart, it's going to be much easier to escape underwater. It's going to be much easier to suppress in this chart if we don't handle the emotions and the drives and the wateriness of such prominent placements throughout the water spectrum in this chart appropriately. To combat the water of this chart, we also have a properly placed Jupiter in Sagittarius, who's also being applied to by Mercury in Sagittarius, and the Sun is in Sagittarius in the sixth house of work. I really don't think that there's, and like, again, oh gosh, but again, that really drives home the idea of becoming a priest. That really drives home the idea of, because Jupiter rules the ninth house via Pisces, and that sixth house of work ruling the ninth house of spirituality, we see that a lot in clergy. So that would be a natural default setting, is to go into the spiritual world and to find a certain level of solace there and comfort there, and there's definitely a lot of glory to be had there, like literal glory, because Jupiter in Sagittarius is a glorified planet, the luckiest planet of the chart in the sign of the Seeker, ruling the ninth house of spirituality. Like it's such a beautiful placement, but I see the life playing out in this chart. And I'm not necessarily too keen because of that Neptune and that Venus. We just need to keep an eye on that. And also like seventh house of relationships, to put Saturn here, and the South Node, like again, the idea of sacrificing love, sacrificing or suppressing or cutting off partnership due to the exalted need for spiritual seeking. Like that's such a big part of the chart. And that like the idea of becoming asexual, but that Taurus moon ruling the chart craves sensuality, craves intimacy, craves touch, craves bonding. So it's just a balancing act, just like anything else in the chart. But we need a spouse who's going to be grounded. We need a spouse who's going to be practical. We need a spouse who's going to understand distance and who's not going to necessarily need as much attention, because there's so much water in the chart that needs to be processed, that really needs rules and regulation that can be brought in by a partner who understands the situation. Yeah, so those are the big aspects of the chart, for sure. Excellent. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Sam's little baby, for donating chart. I hope that was helpful. Good morning. Don't call me Sammy. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. On to the next chart. Let's go to Living Always on Instagram is the next chart that came forward. So she, let's see. Ooh, so much Scorpio. So much Scorpio. Cheers, my darling. And here we have almost another grand trine, but it's an Earth grand trine. Interesting. And then Mars is in Gemini in the 8th house of death. This is an interesting chart for many reasons. And Venus is in her detriment in Virgo, not opposing Saturn anymore. Okay. But Mercury is opposing that Neptune. Okay. All right. Okay, Living Always, let's take a peek. Let's get into it. So we've got the Scorpio ascendant that's really prominent in this chart, because the ascendant in Scorpio is applying to that retrograde Pluto in Scorpio via a really close aspect. So that's only a couple hours difference. So we have a double Scorpio energy in the chart. North Node in Scorpio very strong in the first house as well. We talked about this in the last chart. Whenever the North Node is present in the first house of self, it really does tell us that this person is here to develop personality. This person is here to develop a sense of self and identity, and is really here to make sure that they understand who they are and what they need as people. But also the physical mysteries being very important to them. Scorpio is the body sign that rules the bladder, the large intestine, the reproductive system, and the sinus. So those body systems are going to be very important throughout the life, very important to keep an eye on those, as well as Jupiter in the first house does expand or blow up those body systems a lot. So we just need to make sure that those areas are kind of taken care of, because they tend to be, with Jupiter present, very large and in charge. But Jupiter also in the first house does give a really nice kind of Scorpio expansion. So I think in terms of learning how to be a Scorpio, despite the Leo placement, it's not as strong. So we have much more Scorpio energy in the chart than we do have Leo energy, which is why it's important to not rely on your sun sign, because clearly here we have very important dynamics with Scorpio that if not channeled appropriately, like if somebody said, hey, Living Always, you're a sun in Leo, you should act more like a sun in Leo, but we have such strong Scorpio placements. Leo is bright and fiery and dynamic and nothing like Scorpio, the exact opposite in some cases of Scorpio. So if you're tricked into thinking that you're your sun sign, your chart, and you wonder, like, I don't really feel like a Leo, this is why, because we have such strong Scorpio energy on the ascendant. Then we need to go to the moon in Aries, and the moon in Aries is a really nice partner for the sun in Leo, because the moon in Aries in the 6th house of work is really where it where Aries prefers to be, especially if Mars was present. Mars is ruling the house from the 8th, but that's fine. You know, the moon in Aries in the 6th really does give us an emotional attachment to work. It also gives us an emotional attachment to health and pets. So the idea of health being a double whammy with two personal kind of placements being very attached to the 1st and the 6th house are wellness houses, so to say. But I also really enjoy, although it's separating, the moon is separating from a sextile at 17 degrees with Mars in Gemini, which is the ruler of the 6th house. So it would not surprise me if this person is involved in the home healthcare industry, whether that's being like a massage therapist who travels to other people's homes, or being in that kind of body work world, or also kind of like a nurse or a hospice care worker. Hospice care would actually be excellent for this chart because not only is the ruler of the ascendant, but also the ruler of the 6th house of work is Mars in Gemini in the 8th house of death. So this is a really great association for somebody who has natural mediumship abilities, who naturally stands in between the worlds, who naturally is really trying to cultivate a sense of kind of ancestral communication. I just really enjoy the placement kind of lining up like this, as well as the Mars sextile with the moon. So I think that the more we lean into the 8th house of death, but also taxes, estates, and business in general, there's a very strong link between the Lord of the chart in that space. Any of those professions would be really good, but especially because the moon is in a health house, like I really see hospice being a really great space to navigate in the chart. Especially because this Venus in Virgo is ruling the 12th of hospitalizations, like, again, going out into the community and doing care work or hospital work in the community, like you doing out-call services for the dead and the dying. Like, it's just really, really prominent in your chart, and I enjoy it. I like it a lot. And then that moon in the 6th house of work is also ruling the 9th house of travel. Like, again, traveling for your profession, like, so good. So yeah, you working with an organization that does in-home care for people around your community that really require your assistance, who really are kind of on their last leg, and you providing, not necessarily in a bad way, but kind of that angel of death archetype where you're able to kind of sit with them and allow them to pass peacefully in the presence of your understanding, because you understand death with all these Scorpio placements in a way that very few people actually can, which I think is really important. But then we have the Sun in Leo. Sun in Leo is absolutely fabulous, especially when we see it placed in the 10th house of success. Like, it just really means you're going to be great at what you do. You're also going to find a lot of recognition throughout the life. You're constantly going to be thrown into the spotlight, but you'll hate the spotlight because that Jupiter is making a square to the Sun, or Sun is rather making a square to Jupiter because Sun moves faster. But despite your not wanting to get the recognition that you deserve, I think it's also important to understand how good you are at what you do if you lean into your strengths. Yeah, so that's important. Yeah, making money through health stuff, making money through your own personality with Jupiter in the 1st house ruling the 2nd house of finance. And this is what I love about astrology and what I love about reading charts is no matter where I go in the chart, we keep coming back around to the same exact things, right? And that's how I know that we're on the right track, because regardless of if we look at the success house or if we look at the 8th house or if we look at the financial house, like, it keeps pointing us back to that same kind of death and dying, health and wellness, making a business out of it, earning money through those caregiving aspects, and embracing the Scorpio side of the chart. All of those really, really important. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going to cut it off there. But excellent. Thank you so much for donating your chart to science. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bradley. How are you? Yes, so if you would like to donate your chart, Bradley, as well as anybody, if you would like to jump on the live stream, all I need is your birth date, your birthplace, your exact birth time. Private message me those details. Do not post them publicly for privacy sakes. And we'll add you to the list. We've got a couple more days worth, and then I'll actually be doing a formal all call as well for charts. So feel free to get in now before I get another. I think the last round I asked for, I got like 150 charts. which was ridiculous, but awesome. I love doing these, and apparently everybody else likes watching them. So we'll keep doing it. But if you'd like to be on the stream, that's all I need are those details. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to Maria. Maria, how are you, my darling? Such a pleasure to see your lovely face in the list in the queue this morning. Ooh. Ooh, interesting. Interesting, my dear, my darling. How fascinating. So, first and foremost, love your chart for a couple different reasons. So we have an ascendant in Taurus, and we kind of talked about ascendant in Taurus in the first chart, but the idea of kind of you being very grounded, very foundationally stable, having a lot of earthy energy to you. Taurus loves ritual, routine, and predictability, so there's a lot of really great kind of heavy Taurus aspects that I enjoy about your chart. But not only do you have Taurus on the ascendant, you also have the moon in Taurus in the first house. The moon is exalted in Taurus, which, interestingly enough, we had in the first chart, or the second chart with Sam's child. So I think it's definitely a theme for the morning. When a planet is exalted, yeah, that planet's attributes are greatly strengthened, yeah. So not only did you put the moon in the first house, which automatically gives you the moon's blessing, makes you a little bit more emotional, a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more lunar in nature. Definitely the moon would be a planet that I would encourage you to connect with. But you've chosen to put the moon in her favorite sign, her absolute favorite sign. So it's no wonder you took the full moon class with me, darling, because she's been calling to you for quite some time, which I love. I just absolutely adore it. So we have an exalted planet in the first house, which means that not only do we have a personal planet, the moon, in the first house, giving us those emotional qualities, but she's also exalted. She's super strong. She's so powerful. She's so good. I love this placement, but it definitely embodies a moon in Taurus, somebody who's very sensual, somebody who's very physically touch-oriented, loves to just kind of disappear into a bubble bath with nice scents and nice music and good food, really easy to kind of hack your nervous system from an emotional perspective because it's just the simple pleasures. It's just being out in nature. It's just really observing the natural world and all of the physicality of it and how that makes you feel calm and safe. Right? But we also have conflict in the chart. The conflict in the chart is the ruler of the chart, who is Venus in Leo, very close to the sun, 5 degrees away from the sun in the 4th house of family. So this is where we get into some of the trauma. This is where we get into some of the issues of the chart. One of the reasons why you were blessed with such a strong moon, I feel personally, is because this Venus who's ruling your chart in the 4th house of family is combust in Leo. So the family dynamic was actually very dramatic. The family dynamic was very fiery. The family dynamic was very stubborn and fixed. And that really clashed with a lot of your sensitivity. And I think that we can see in your chart how you having this sensitivity and you being raised in a kind of non-sensitive environment can really trigger you on multiple levels. And we need to respect that and kind of hash that out in the chart for sure. Because this overheated Venus, who's not just in the fiery sign of Leo, ruled by the sun in the 4th house of family, but is also combust the sun. So when a planet is within 7.5 degrees on the other side of the sun, it means that the planet is overheating, it's combusting. She cannot be, Venus, the goddess of love and abundance, cannot be seen in the sky. She's eclipsed by the sun's light. And that makes her very weak in the chart. And so the family dynamic of the 4th house and the home dynamic of the 4th house is something that needs a little bit of remediation, something that needs a little bit of a talking to, something that needs a little bit more of your assistance. So we might need to kind of work with the 4th house and the family dynamic a little bit more strictly, because that's one of the weakest areas of your chart. Despite you having all the tools to deal with it, with this exalted moon in the first, which is glorious, we need to kind of spend a little bit more time sorting through the rubble and the rabble of that. An exalted Mercury in the 5th house. Mercury and Virgo in the 5th. I love it. I absolutely adore those placements. Makes you super creative, makes your mind very sharp, very witty, very intelligent as well. I love it. I just absolutely love a good Mercury placement. But Mercury in the 5th house really does give you a boon when it comes to working with children. You just speak their language. It also gives you the power of creative speech and creative writing. It also means that you're multifaceted when it comes to your parental styles, when it comes to your sexual preferences. There's just a lot of grace and abundance when it comes to Mercury, Lord of all things magic, medicinal, communicative, contract-oriented, money-oriented. There's just a lot of really strong energy in the fifth house. I love it. That Mercury is also ruling your second house of finance. So if there was a way you wanted to make money, it would definitely be working with children. I would highly, highly suggest that. You could also open up sexuality. You could do a lot of sex education with children, which I think would be a great expression of a fifth house Mercury, especially with Pluto being there, Pluto being that kind of deep underworldy energy, and that Uranus being that kind of unpredictableness. There's a lot of fun placements and a lot of fun career and monetary combinations that we could play with in that space. I don't like this Mars and Libra in the sixth. I think that if you were to enter the workforce and for some reason you chose to work in the family business, you would hate it. Absolutely gut-wrenchingly hate it. And I say that with like pure confidence, because you getting stuck at a desk job or you getting told by the people that you already have friction with what to do, you're not having it. That the chart is not okay with that. Not in the slightest. Like, you're not here for the fame. You're not here for the fortune. You have such an ability to shine on your own. You don't need them. Like, you don't need their presence in your life. It's your rules, your terms, and I think that the more you try to really focus on the problem, the worse it gets from a work, health, pets perspective. With that Mars being ruled by the Venus in the fourth, and that Mars being in fall. So tricky placement for sure, but easy to navigate if you know what you're doing, and you draw a lot of boundaries, clear boundaries, very important. Let's look at this Neptune and Scorpio in the seventh. So Neptune and Scorpio is a little bit of a venomous placement. I'm not necessarily a fan with it, especially in a relationship house. It does mean that your relationships are a little bit prone to that Neptunian Scorpio addiction issue, and having spouses that not only have baggage mentally and emotionally, but also tend to soothe that baggage through addiction and through escapism, especially with toxic substances, literally kind of Scorpio venom. So that's something to kind of be aware of, especially because the work dynamic tends to exacerbate that. We'd want to make sure that you're choosing a spouse that does not compound old patterns, right? If anything, I would really kind of want you to do some Mars remediation. I would really want you to partner with that planet of vigor in order to remediate not just the sixth house of work, but also the seventh house of relationships, because that can get kind of messy if you don't know how to help somebody through the struggle. Which you can, like, you have an exalted moon, you have the empathy and compassion, but a moon in Taurus can also be somewhat enabling, yeah? Because unlike you, who just needs to be fed the right stuff in order to be happy, that application to somebody who's in an addiction state is not necessary. They don't need what they need, right? They need something else. They need what they actually need, which is different from Taurus, who's really kind of upfront about what is needed. Cool. I think that's it for the chart. There are other areas, but we could always work on them one-on-one, but I think we have a good picture of the chart with that interpretation. I miss your face too, Bradley. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go to our last chart. Our last and final chart is going to be Naomi. Hello, my dear. How are you? Cheers. Good morning. Or good afternoon by the time you watch this. Take a peek. What do we got? We have an ascendant in Gemini with the North Node in Gemini. North Node in the first house seems to be a theme this morning. Again, when the North Node is present in the first house is the house of identity. It's the house of self. And so when we have the North Node here, the North Node as that part of the ecliptic that tells us kind of where we're going throughout the life. It's one of the markers for life purpose that we see in charts as well. So when we see the North Node being very present in the first house of self, this is somebody who's going to need to master the sense of self throughout their lifetime, right? And that North Node, I think, is great in Gemini, but it's tricky in Gemini too, because Gemini is a sign that tends to be very adaptable by nature. So it's kind of like, how do you seek identity as a chameleon? Yeah, you're still a chameleon. Change is your nature, but that can be a little bit tricky to figure out. So let me just say that, like, the chameleon archetype, chameleon medicine would be something to connect with, Naomi. I think that would really explain a lot in your life, because you've had to change so much, despite your mind being very fixed and rigid with that Capricorn and that Sun in Capricorn in the 8th. Like, you are all business all the time, girlfriend. But your adaptability is key in your life. And I think that that's really important, because that's like the ruler of your chart is Mercury in Capricorn in the 8th of business. Like, you understand business, like you get the business. And I love that placement. It's so pure, because Mercury is the sign of the mind and intellect, and Capricorn is known as a very business oriented sign. For you to have that in the 8th house of business with your sun ruling your first house self, like, you're an entrepreneur by nature, but entrepreneurs adapt and change, right? It's kind of what, if you don't follow Gary Vaynerchuk at all, like that's such a Gary thing to say, is adaptability and change and pivoting is just brilliantly displayed in your chart, and I love it. Let's see. We also have Moon and Virgo down in the 4th. The heart is definitely in the home and family section of the chart, but tends to be a little bit picky. So one of the things, if you really want, if you're having a rough day or if you're having a rough week and you really wanted to soothe your heart space, if you wanted to soothe your emotions, I would really do a deep cleaning of your house. Yeah. Or hire somebody to do a deep cleaning of your house. Like, whatever you feel is best. But I think the feng shui and the orientation of your own home, your own family dynamic is very emotionally influential to you. And if you understand that, and you understand that if shit's going down in the family dynamic and you feel terribly out of sorts about it, like, you need to understand that you've put your heart here. So when that dynamic, either with your physical home or your relationships with family, are out of sorts, then that's going to really impact your emotional health. And here's where we get into some interesting placements. Because we have Venus retrograde in Aquarius, co-present with Mars in Aquarius and the MC in Aquarius, all in the 9th house of travel, foreigners, spirituality, and higher education. Not only are these topics really important to you, but I think we also have some adoption stuff. I think we also have some really interesting dynamics in the chart when it comes to foreign culture, when it comes to ancestor work, when it comes to, like, there's so much. Wow, the depth in the chart is just exploding in front of my eyes. I love it. I absolutely love it. See, I thought we were just gonna skate on the surface, but no, these placements are delicious, Naomi. Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, so Venus retrograde ruling the 5th house of children from the 9th house of foreigners. It wouldn't surprise me if you are somebody who was adopted, or you've adopted children into your life, because when we see Venus, goddess of love, ruling the 5th house of children, but from the 9th house of foreigners, and who is also retrograde, like, we see this pattern a lot in somebody who's acquired children, or who parents, or who was a child that was brought from a foreign country into the home, into the family dynamic. Mars also supports this, because Mars is also kind of co-present and ruling the 11th house of philanthropy and social groups. Mars is also ruling the 6th house of work, with Neptune and Scorpio. That's an interesting side of your profession, that it's almost as if you have two professions, one that's very business oriented, but another that's very deep, very emotional, very much tied to the travel, the foreign, the international work that you've kind of worked with already. You'd be a great diplomat. Um, yeah, you'd be a great diplomat. But working with foreign cultures, working with especially children who are like, you'd be a great adoption agent. Um, you'd be a great emissary. You'd be a great somebody who steps into the role that is naturally very confusing and somewhat very secretive and hidden. Yeah, especially when it comes to laws and rules, which are Mercury and Sun and Capricorn absolutely love a good law and a rule, as well as your Moon and Virgo, and you're able to help people navigate those really tricky, secretive placements that I think are very difficult for a lot of people, but you just find them very interesting and very easy. And also, you've navigated you've navigated them yourself with some of these placements. Um, yeah. I mean, the layers of opportunity in your chart, because of the flexibility, because of the dynamic nature of your chart, like you could have been a nurse, like you could have worked in healthcare with the ninth house of higher learning, you could have taught nursing with the Venus in the higher education house ruling both the 12th house of hospitalizations and the fifth house of children, like you would have been a great midwife, um, neonate nurse. Yeah, just so beautiful. All these placements have multiple interpretations, and I can see where that Gemini ascendant comes in because you have so much opportunity to do so many wonderful things and help so many people. It's just sticking to one thing, which you don't necessarily need to. I think that's an important kind of capstone lesson for your chart. You don't need to pick one thing, my dear. You really don't. It's not something that is required of you. You can bounce from thing to thing and have multiple professions in your lifetime and still kind of make it out as a success and have touched a lot of people. So just kind of be aware of that. I don't think that you need to call yourself by one label. I think, in fact, a large portion of your chart is asking you to be adaptable and flexible and to say, yes, I can do that, instead of, no, I've never done that before. Because, again, back to that North Node in Gemini in the first, so close to the ascendant, like you're here to learn how to be adaptable. And with all the skills and rulerships in your chart, I can see how adaptable you could become. Excellent. Thank you, my dear. Thank you for donating your chart. I very, very much appreciate it. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on and for supporting the live stream on Facebook and Instagram. I very much appreciate you. Again, if you would like to be a part of the live stream, all you need to do is private message me your birth date, birthplace, and exact birth time, and I'll add you to the list. If you would like to work one-on-one, if you would like to schedule a private session with me, you can always go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website. We can unpack your natal chart, talk a little bit more in depth about areas of life that you're struggling with, and help you to rectify those, both from an astrological magic perspective and ritual and honoring your own personal energies, and also through lifestyle, through medical intervention and things like that. That's very present in the work that I do as well. And yeah, if you'd like to learn astrology, you can always download the classes on my website too. So that's that. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back on Wednesday at 10:30 for another round of the Astro-Babble. But until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor.